Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to, we need to mute. Give that a second.
New world.
All right. Take two. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. This is a special meeting of the Transportation Committee where we have a special guests, I should say, the Connecticut Commuter Rail Council who is joining us today and to give us some information about what they've been meeting on, discussing, deliberating over, and ultimately would like to see the Transportation Committee discuss, deliberate over, debate, and ultimately bring forward a bill. So we look forward to hearing from you. I will, does my co-chair have any comments?
Just very quickly, thank you for joining us this year. I know we're restoring a long lost tradition that the Transportation Committee has had, meeting with you before your annual meeting. I'm glad to actually be here back in person to get to meet and talk with you folks as you go into your annual meeting this coming year. We're interested and certainly thrilled to hear some recommendations about the operations of our commuter rail lines in the state of Connecticut. There's a lot of conversation about what we need to work towards to bring back commuters on our rail lines, and whether or not there are investments and opportunities that we may be missing as a legislature and as a state. And I know you guys are on the ground every day working on a lot of this to forward our commuter rail assets. So I really do appreciate you being here. There's a number of members here in the room. There's some members here online. You have a active and engaged constituency here in the legislature. So I just want to say thank you for coming here. And the floor is yours. Oh, Senator Wong wants to move it along and turn it all over to you. So Chairman Gilday, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And first, let me say thank you for agreeing to meet with us. It is a long held tradition. We know you had a long day today. And so we appreciate you sticking with us. If I could, I would tell you, we just like to do this kind of in three quick segments. First, we'd like to talk to you about our legislative agenda. Then we'd like to talk to you about our Connecticut rail plan comments. And then we'd like to conclude with just an overview of some operational issues that we feel we face. So first, from a legislative agenda perspective, we really focused on what we think would be 5 important bills as rail advocates. One is the restoration of Shoreline East to 100% pre-COVID service. Every other branch, Waterbury branch, Danbury branch, New Canaan branch, and the main line have all really got brought back pretty quick, rather quickly. Some of those branches like the Hartford line and Waterbury line do in fact have high subsidies. I'm going to hold most of my subsidy talk until I offer testimony. But in the meantime, I will tell you that that is a vibrant line, that had been a vibrant line. It's the only line that has not been brought back to 100%. The other lines did not have to wait for this phantom ridership to come. All the other lines, they put service back to attract riders. So I would tell you that is our first legislative priority. The second thing, which will also kind of dovetail into our rail plan comments, is a common transit service app. Right now, when it comes to transportation, first from a rail transportation perspective, you have 3 very distinct lines, and they're treated as such. You have the Hartford line, you have the Shoreline East, and you have the main line. Hi, Doug. And each one of those is treated as a distinct line. We really need to get to a spot where we have a common service app, where we are linking, where it's a single use, where it doesn't matter if you're on the Shoreline East, it doesn't matter if you're on the Hartford line. You could be in Guilford and you could say, I want to go to Hartford, and it's just going to do it for you. So that's another legislative agenda item that we think is critical. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more when we get into our Connecticut rail plan. Fare-free busing. Some folks may say, well, gee whiz, that's not rail advocacy, but the last mile is. And so we do focus a lot on last mile. I actually do think that Connecticut Commuter Rail Council, which I'm going to talk about next, really needs to start to look at the last mile and make that part of our charge. That is a critical aspect of rail commuting, is how do we get you home from your train station? So fare-free busing, we think, has been just a really home run from that perspective. It's gotten cars off the road, and it has really helped with the last mile. I can speak selfishly for myself as well. On occasion, if the Waterbury line is late or not there, I could actually jump on the GBT bus, go to Stratford, and pick up the main line. The busing and rail line link is not nearly made as much as it should be. Connecticut Commuter Rail Council. So I'm going to speak a little about ourselves here. I see Senator Wong there, and he'll remember the days when they tried to disband the council. And so this is always a little preemptive, but that's always in the back of my mind. We are an independent advocacy group, and sometimes people get frustrated with us. We do try to our best to make improvements. I take the Waterbury line. Giselle is a Shoreline East commuter, right? Doug takes, takes the train and does a great job biking the last mile. So my point to that though is, so we see it, right? We're rail commuters. We're there in the trench. Sometimes people get frustrated. We're an independent advocacy group. So with that, I would just like to again articulate that our legislative charge be strengthened, and that it preemptively, if there is any ever talk to weaken our charge, we would certainly want you to remember that we're rail advocates whose only mission is to improve rail commuting in the state. I would also tell you there's a second piece of that. And then the second piece of that is we spend some money out of our own pocket. I've paid for postage, I've paid for posting, I've paid for my MailChimp account to send email blasts out. I paid for a website hosting. Now, thankfully, Kate Rosen does to help offset the cost. So we pay for an awful lot out of our pocket, truthfully. We do think it's time that we have some level of administrative help. MailChimp, you can only do so many email addresses before you have to pay for it, right? A Zoom registration, all of our meetings are hybrid now, so we don't have a Zoom account. Truthfully, we don't want to use the Department of Transportation. We're independent. Once we start to use them, I feel like they feel we're beholden to them. We have enough time now getting them to work with us on occasion. I wouldn't want to have to be beholden to them for finances. And then the last bill, and then I'll move on to the rail plan topic. The rail plan is Waterbury and the Danbury branch fleet. A few years back, we went out, the bonding commission approved new rail cars for the Shoreline East and the Hartford line. Unfortunately, the Waterbury branch and the Danbury branch, they kind of got left behind. Though the Waterbury branch and the Danbury branch commuters sit on the oldest rail cars in the fleet. So I do think it's time we think it's time for the Waterbury and the Danbury branch to get those cars updated. They're exceptionally old. If they were cars, they'd be relics and they'd be gone already. Now, I would tell you, I know you're not interested per se on what they get replaced to, but just to have some comfort level, we're going to talk about electrification in a little while here, and so we do think they should be dual powered. We do think that in a perfect world, if all the stars align and electrification happened, you're still talking 10 to 15 years. So in the meantime, we have what we have, and that's diesel on those lines. So those are our 5, what we would consider to be legislative items that we would like to advance. I can move on to the next topic or see if there's questions.
Thanks so much. Appreciate that. Obviously, I have a couple of questions, but I thought I'd open it up to the committee members here and on Zoom and see if they have any questions initially. Senator Wong.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Jim, thank you and all your members who are volunteers in the good work that you all do. It's interesting to focus on the independence and part of the role that we gave in that quasi-independent role is the fact that you have investigative powers to try to find out and demand accountability and transparency from the DOT. That power has been retained. Have you found a need to ask for that kind of accountability and transparency in your interactions post-COVID?
Okay, that's a great question. Thank you for and that will actually dovetail into our operational discussions. Yes, I will tell you this. I I would like to, so I serve a lot of roles and I work with a lot of different organizations, Manufacturing Connecticut, Connecticut Commuter Rail Council on the CTEX board. And in most cases, I feel like our opinion is valued. And in most cases, I feel like our opinions are sought out. I do think on occasion, sometimes with the Department of Transportation, speaking very honestly, that there's kind of this push and a pull. And I sometimes feel like they don't always want to hear our opinion. They don't always want to hear what we have to say. I think sometimes I think sometimes when we push, that offends them. I will also tell you, since you asked, that, we do have our legislative charge, in my opinion, is not always followed. And I just have some examples. We asked in April, think about this, in April 2022, for answers to some very simple questions. We asked them on time percentage by major stations. Those are things that if you're operating a rail agency, that I think you'd want at your fingertips. We asked for passenger volume by station. We've asked for major crimes by station. And we asked for that in April. We've asked 3 times since for that follow-up, and we still don't have it. In August, we asked for the ridership numbers for the express trains, because we've touted these express trains. They've cut all this time, they, so to speak, off the commute. But we wanted to see how vibrant that was. If you lived in Fairfield, are you really going to drive to Bridgeport to save 11 minutes? I don't know. If you live in Darien, are you going to drive to Stamford? So those are the type of questions we wanted. So we asked for the express train numbers. We asked for updated counts for the Waterbury after they put the new train in, and we asked for those in August, and we still don't have them. We asked for a quiet car, the resumption of the quiet car. We asked for that in September. I think some of you were on the email where Metro North said, we're connected to the Department of Transportation, said, no, you're gonna have to ask Metro North. We asked Metro North, they said, no, you're gonna have to ask the Department of Transportation. To answer your question succinctly, I think that, no, I don't think our investigative powers and the questions that we ask, which I just told you today, are very reasonable questions. To have to go 10 months, none of you guys, I promise you this, none of you would have to wait 10 months for passenger count questions. We shouldn't have to either. So I hope that answers your question.
So as of today, you've not gotten answers to those questions, correct?
Last night after asking for a 6th time, I did get the quiet car answer that not the answer I wanted, but after the 6th time asking it in a 4-month period, I finally got it. But all the other questions, the ones from May, passenger volume, on time percentage from April of 2022, still do not have those.
And they're incredibly helpful for you to be able to report back to the commuters and getting a better understanding of progress or what progress needs to occur. It's information that helps you do your business. Is that correct?
Yes, I'll tell you 2 really quick stories. First, you would think that the Department of Transportation would want the express numbers. You would think they would want to know whether or not the extra money that we're spending on express trains is worth it. Are people driving from Darien to Stamford to save 8 minutes? I don't know. You would think they want to know. So to your point, I think they're very helpful. All those data questions I asked are helpful. The second thing, some folks may remember about 6 years ago, 7 years ago, the Waterbury station was having significant vandalism. And so we pushed the Department of Transportation to get those numbers, to get the car theft numbers. And then we worked as independent advocates with our contacts in the towns that we have to get the police station out there to do extra patrolling. And then it led to lights. It was having the metrics, right? It was knowing that anecdotally our commuters were telling us, hey, there's a problem here. It was then getting the data, because I'm a data guy. It was getting the data to say, hey, yes, guess what? There is a problem. And then to focus the light on it. So the things we're asking for are not crazy off the wall requests, nor quite frankly, do I think they're difficult to get. Yeah, absolutely. By all means.
And just to add on that too, for one of the reasons the council, we really narrowed down our request to just on-time performance on Metro North's line by major Connecticut stations. So 3 stations. One reason, just to give you some context, we're all commuters. We also talk to a lot of people in the commuting community. We all have our own kind of commuting crews and employers. And we kind of want to make sure that someone is advocating for service on behalf of the Connecticut resident. Metro North is operated by an entity that's completely based in New York. And without the Connecticut DOT is the entity that they listen to for recommendations on behalf of the Connecticut commuter. So looking at some of these really basic metrics, we're looking for performance so that we can articulate, now that we're in a post-COVID world, is the schedule lining up with what's best suited for the Connecticut-based commuter? There may not be as many people going into the city potentially for commuting in an office, but we may want to have people, but we've seen ridership numbers surge on weekends across both and going in both directions. We've also seen ridership potentially stronger commuting intrastate within Connecticut between major stations, people traveling to places like Stamford. So that data is specifically helpful in understanding the Connecticut residents' commuter experience.
If I may, through you, Mr. Chair, if you could just help me identify yourself.
Me?
No, the other
Oh, sorry.
colleague who just.
Sorry, Blaise Levitan, Connecticut Commuter Rail Council, and I live in Guilford. Commute to Greenwich.
I'm Zell Stever. I live in Groton. I'm the guy who's been championing the extension of Shoreline East to Rhode Island and the creation of a new branch line from the Groton, New London area to Norwich. And while I'm retired, as you can see from my hair, I don't commute regularly, but I do commute to New York City to go see my kids because that's the only alternative I really have. Because the alternative to that is I-95, which is a nightmare these days.
Thanks, Zell. Hi, Senator Wong and committee chairs, Doug House-Sladen, City of New Haven, or Representative of New Haven. And I live within about a 1/10 of a mile from the State Street train station and 1/2 of a mile from Union Station. Very excited to do so.
I think you have a couple members online as well. Is there anybody online who wants to
We do have
introduce themselves?
Julia McGrath online.
Oh, yeah.
Julia McGrath is also out there, I think.
So
on
I
the
think
shoreline.
she has the ability to
Can she
speak
talk?
and introduce
Okay, I
herself.
apologize.
Thank you. So my name is Julia McGrath. I'm from Stonington, and I am a zealous advocate of Zell's efforts to extend the rail service up to Norwich as I work there, and I would love to be a rail commuter up to there.
My name is Kate Rosen. I live in Woodbridge, Connecticut. I am a member of the Commuter Rail Council to focus on the last mile solution, specifically connections between train and multimodal and bikes.
Hello, my name is Melissa Kane. I am a member of the Commuter Rail Council. I live in Westport. I advocate for commuters on the main line as well as all of the branches that have been mentioned here. Thank you.
Well, again, thank you all for being here, and thank you, Senator Wong, for asking them to introduce themselves. We did that a little backwards, but better late than never. So I will just ask, you talked a little bit about Shoreline East. Obviously, I represent communities greatly impacted by the schedule change during COVID, and now folks getting back to work. I guess I would ask, it seems to me that beyond a schedule change, beyond bringing the schedule back to pre-COVID levels, we've got a multifaceted issue that needs to be addressed. And I just wonder if you could speak to that a little bit. I think, I hear from constituents all the time that the schedules don't marry up. Even, the trains that are running, often they'll arrive in New Haven and the New Haven to New York train will leave 1 minute later or 1 minute earlier rather. And so they miss that train or, different things of that nature. I think work schedules have changed significantly. We've spoken with DOT a little bit about this. Obviously the peak days seem to be Tuesday through Thursday, Mondays and Fridays, often work from home days. So I think, the committee is really going to have to consider all of these things as we work with DOT to try and restore Shoreline East to accommodate commuters across the state. But would love to hear from you as the issues as you see them.
So a resident Shoreline East expert, I'm going to defer this one to Blaise.
Hey, yeah, thanks. So it's a great question. I think right now we've kind of talked about this before, but really the main problem with the schedule right now is that Shoreline East does not make sense to ride. So we're kind of stuck in this limbo of, waiting for more ridership to increase service, but not necessarily, but people aren't going to ride it. Well, it just does not make sense to get on it. There are multiple hour gaps. If you get through during the day, I mean, you're not even talking about a 1 hour to even an hour and a half. You're talking like a 3 hour gap. My father-in-law recently commuting from Guilford over to see an attorney over in Madison. He doesn't have a car. You're talking, 5 hours because of the train schedule to go over and do business and come back on a 12-minute ride. And then for commuting, I commute to Greenwich every day from Guilford, and I live in walking distance to the Guilford train station. And other than just being interested in rail, or on some, odd occasion where I don't have a car, it doesn't make sense for me to take Shoreline East and transfer, because I could be, talking an hour to 2 hours difference in the way that the schedule is designed. It's a combination of both extremely decreased service and then the Shoreline East service probably being something that I would describe as more of just checking a box to say that we have it, rather than actually being thoughtfully connected with the 2 other branch lines. People trying to navigate, both my wife and my father-in-law, for example, recently trying to navigate to go see my sister-in-law in New York City. It's difficult to try to figure out the train, when it's going to connect, how long you're going to be in New Haven. I was coming back from Greenwich. The best case scenario still puts me on my way home with a 43-minute wait in New Haven. So I drive over to the West Haven train station and take Metro North from there. And I'm lucky that I can do that. But it would be a lot better for both the environment, I think, for our local economy, and for people that don't have that option to do that, because it is a very long bus ride to go from that same drive, to be able to hop on a train system. But with that reduced schedule, and with the way that it's just not connected up with the other lines, it's just, you're not going to get the riders back on. It makes no sense to ride it unless you don't have a choice. You guys live in Shoreline East too, so.
I'm interested in the Shoreline East, and it really, when you look carefully at the Connecticut public transportation system, it's basically set up, but it has been for years, set up to get people to the Big Apple to do work. And what's happened during COVID was that a lot of those people were executives, and in fact, they could work from home, and in fact did. And there's been this slow return to work in New York City. But let me give you the other end of the state. All during COVID, at Electric Boat, you can't build submarines from home. You have to go to the office or to the shipyard, in fact, to actually build the boats. So there is a real need for people coming to and from Groton and the New London area. It's not a small matter that there are no trains that come into New London, and never mind Groton, because that doesn't exist right now, to get people to potentially to work. The same thing goes for Pfizer, which is our other big employer in the region. You don't make any drugs at Pfizer unless they go through the laboratories at Pfizer located in Groton. And there is no way to get people on commuter trains to make that happen. Effectively, they all have to drive. And what essentially has happened is everybody's driving in a single occupancy vehicle. And basically about 90 to 95% of those people come by themselves. And so this is where I think there's got to be some sort of a rethinking at the state level as to how do we serve those industries that are where we're actually really manufacturing real goods, such as submarines and virus vaccines for things like COVID. So those are just a couple of examples of why this is so important. And then we have, although we don't refer to it, we have the U.S. Navy located in Groton. And in fact, it is essentially a city in itself. And I can tell you the majority of the sailors and the people who run that submarine base went to work all during COVID. They weren't working from home, and they too could very much benefit from. So you've got a location there that makes great sense to have a commuting system. And so while I'm talking about Shoreline East, obviously Shoreline East stopping at Rhode Island it would be a great step forward. But it doesn't really work well until you get the line connected up from all the way from Westerly all the way up to Providence, where you can connect up with the MBTA, the Boston system, because in fact, the submarines are not built just in Groton or New London, but there's also a big group up in Quonset, Rhode Island, that has the same issue of they build big pieces, they ship them down by barge, and they then assemble them in Groton. So the notion of a real commuter system, which brings real people on a daily basis, is important. And the other thing that I think Jim very quickly mentioned is that, and I've experienced this myself, we got on Shoreline East to go to New York, and on the weekend, and it was, oh my God, I thought I'd forgotten what day it was, because it was absolutely jam-packed. There was standing room only when we got to New York City. So there is a shift of some sort. We don't quite understand what that's about, of people wanting to use rail as opposed to getting in their car. Now, I know something about the car business because I've lived here for well over 40 years in Groton, and the alternative is to take the car. And you can get to New York City in 2.5 hours if there's no traffic. But there has been many a times where it's been a 5 and 6 hour trip because of stop and go traffic. And so it is an alternative. Rail, public transportation is an alternative to getting from where you want to be, or from where you are to where you want to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cohen. Thank you, Madam Chair. For Shoreline East, we have heard from Connecticut DOT about some of the operational issues, one of which is a passing track in New London. So there is a planned project, and it's in the works to create this passing siding to be able to pull over a train and still have 4 lines that are going so you can actually go well. So some of those things are really operational that just literally need to be done so that you can have more service while you have the Northeast Corridor running by you. But some of the other questions, as we've also heard feedback from various members of administration, that it's an if you build it, they will come moment, or it's a chicken and an egg problem, I guess it was, which is some of the land use around the stations could be developed in a way that is much more transit ready or transit friendly. So in other major transit systems, you're seeing a value capture at the property level around transit stations. And that value capture then helps operations ongoing. So if we are looking for an additional revenue source for operations on transit, one source might be the land around our transit stations that the state does own. I'm not prepared to talk more about it necessarily. That's another committee, I'm sure, but that is one way to help operate successful transit. We're thinking about BART out in San Francisco, right? Has been doing that and developing housing around the stations themselves. And I would just echo what Zell said a lot about how the system is focusing a lot still on New York City. 2 of the biggest attractions we have in the summer, Sailfest or just Mystic, everything about Mystic, really hard to use the train to get there. And these things are really, and the DOT does a great job on big events like Sailfest to partner with people and partner with events. But it's hard to shift around schedules if there's not enough funding there to like make a schedule that makes sense for families. So I just highlighting Connecticut's biggest strength. Obviously, our natural wonders and our quality of life here is amongst them. But to be able to get them to use the rail system to celebrate our Saturdays and Sundays would be really great.
Just want to say one last thing off of that point. COVID, there's a huge paradigm shift with COVID in that there's no surprise that the 2 lines that lost the least amount of ridership, and the data supports this, is the Waterbury branch and the Hartford line. And the reason why that they lost the least amount of ridership is because there is a thirst for intrastate rail. And I think that those metrics point that out. And I really believe that if Shoreline East had some semblance of a schedule, you would see them follow suit as well. So I definitely think we have to, this paradigm shift of moving people to New York has changed, and we got to focus on interstate rail.
Well, I appreciate that answer, and really thorough answer. I think some of you may have done your research because you certainly touched on some of the passions of committee members here: housing, tourism, all sorts of things that we really care about, and we'll certainly be discussing more, I think it's worth noting that during our committee meeting earlier today, we did raise a concept, to allow the Commuter Rail Council to have a space at public hearing to really talk about these recommendations. And we can consider as a committee, what that bill might look like going forward. So we're excited about that. I concur on a lot of these points. I actually rode Metro North to see Billy Joel on Friday night, which I was very happy to take rail. I don't think it's a big secret to anybody in this building or outside of this building that I want to get as many cars off the road as possible, lower emissions. It's a passion of mine. And how we can do that in a safe, efficient, and cost-effective manner is obviously something that we want to do. But I had a terrible time trying to get Shoreline East to marry up with my ride to from New Haven to New York. And so I scrapped it and drove to New Haven, as so many people do, or drive to West Haven, or drive elsewhere where they can find free parking, which is another passion that we're going to need to talk about as we move forward. But again, I'll open this up. I'm sort of dominating. Yes, Representative Farr.
Thank you all for being here. Just a couple questions, particularly around the legislative agenda. I so appreciate your inclusion of an element of busing in your agenda and your focus on the last mile. And I think as a committee, we'll be having a lot of busing conversations. And I just wanted to kind of bring up to you, you just noted here fare free busing, but I know, as I've heard from constituents, certainly there's been an appreciation around fare free busing, but also recognition that if we do that, there's an and to that, which is improve our routes and improve the frequency. And I just wanted to kind of hear from you all, because you included fare-free busing, am I also hearing that the Rail Council is interested in being supportive of just greater busing infrastructure overall?
So I just want to point out one or two things when it comes to fare-free busing
Yeah.
and the last mile. I will tell you that I still feel, and we hear from our commuters, for instance, that there's still much better job we can do connecting buses to rail.
Mhm.
Hartford Yard Goats games, for example. So our rail commuters tell us all the time that they like to connect the bus after going to a Hartford Yard Goat game to the rail. And that's just one example where we do need to, I think if I understand your question, we do need to, yes, increase bus service as
Right.
well. And we need to have somebody looking at the bus service, somebody looking at the rail service, somebody looking at the tourism in the area. Hey, what time does the Hartford Yard Goat game get out? Hey, should the bus go here? So to that point, I agree wholeheartedly that we have to marry those two better and look at those schedules better. The second thing I want to point out in the last mile, I know last mile too, I know we focused on busing, but I still think we have to make it easier for people at stations who may scooter, who may bike, because we're not really doing them a lot of favors. Metro North is interesting, and I want to be as positive I can be. So COVID mattered when it mattered, and then it didn't matter when it didn't matter. And what I mean by that is, they never really enforced the masks at the end, but then they said, well, we're not enforcing the mask, but you still can't bring bikes on the train, or we still can't give you a quiet car. So I still think when we talk about the last mile, we still have to do better for our bikers as well and our scooters. So I just want to point that out as well. I don't know if
You've heard us talk about the beginning of the trip and the end of the trip. It is both the first and last mile. It's not just one or the other, it's both. I mean, for example, in this proposal or the feasibility study that's being looked at in Groton, literally when you run the rail around on the old, what's called Groton Secondary, it literally runs between Electric Boat and Pfizer. You are at the last mile. You can walk across the street and get to your job. And that's very important, because there's an example of this rail was put in a very long time ago, and someone thought about that problem. And we just simply have abandoned rail for that particular loop. And it's a no-brainer. The rails are in the ground. We could just simply get a train there and get people on and off, and it just makes a huge amount of sense. And while I'm talking about Electric Boat and Pfizer, let me also suggest, and you saw it in today's paper, that there was a big meeting in Eastern Connecticut about the whole industrial complex there. And they bring up repeatedly that they need public transportation. Now, they often don't say it's rail or bus, but they talk about it as being public transportation. So it's something on the minds of a lot of business people in that area. And then the other final point is that you always hear the notion, well, what we need are jobs. Well, we got the jobs. We need to get the people to those jobs, particularly in southeastern Connecticut. What you may not have heard is that Pfizer, although they had some years ago had dispersed a lot of their people to New Haven and on to Boston, are now bringing those very same people back to the facilities in Groton. And so they are now in the process of converting one of their office buildings back to a laboratory space so they can add another 100 scientists to their staff. And so when you've got a situation where Electric Boat wants to hire between 3,000 and 4,000 new employees, we got the jobs. We need to get the people to the jobs.
Thank you all for that. And just one other question that I actually had, kind of looking at recommendations, and maybe it was something you're going to get into further in your presentation. But for myself, and I think a couple of us here who live more closely the Hartford line, I'm curious in regards to any recommendations that you all have in particular with that line. I'm certainly familiar with the Connecticut Rail Plan recommendations, but am would love to hear from you all about your Hartford line
So
recommendations.
I'm going to actually defer this one to Blaze as well. I will tell you
Yeah.
what's pretty interesting or neat for us is that we actually have a 6 o'clock meeting tonight as well at Union Station, where we'll be getting an update on upcoming Hartford line work. So that will be a fruitful meeting tonight. Then I'll let
Yeah, I think on the Hartford line, this is something that we brought up with the Connecticut DOT. You can use the Shoreline East website to navigate to Metro North stations as a trip planner, but you can't use there's no Hartford line stations on the trip. So I've tried to try to plan my way coming up here, and you have to use 2 different websites, but you can use the one. It all comes back, I think, the Hartford line, which has been a really tremendous success. And is a really important thing for the state, and I'm a huge supporter of it. It all comes back to just the decentralized problem of both rail and then the whole DOT, where it's different departments. It's a larger problem where going from the Hartford line to Metro North or going from the Hartford line to Shoreline East, it's a completely different provider. It's a completely different experience. And kind of all of our comments could probably, most of them, be summed up to that problem. And even that structure, that the way the state operates transit, you have really great lines like the Hartford line, like even New Haven line and Shoreline East, that gets stuck in this limbo of it's that department or that agency, totally independent agency, totally independent experience, literally a totally different website, and a different customer service center. To try to figure out, we have someone come almost to every single meeting on the Hartford line to talk about trying to go to, they don't have a car, they want to go to events in Hartford or go to school in Hartford on the Hartford line, but there's no late service. The service gets cut off too early to even if you want to go to a show at the Civic Center, you're not taking the train, you have to drive. Otherwise, you're going to have to leave the show halfway through. So we have this infrastructure that's really set up, but it's just not utilized properly. And a lot of those problems stem from the fact that then the bus is a completely different set of people than the people doing the train versus a completely separate people doing the other thing. And I know Doug has some really good insight on the Hartford line being at the Union Station. So
Thank you, Blaze. And thank you for the question, Representative Farrar. I think one of to Blaze's last point about how the bus system and how our rail system interact, because the Hartford line is so young, it's turning 5 this year on June 16th. And because of that, we have not yet reoriented the rest of our bus lines, the rest of our transit services to really appreciate the Hartford line for what it is, which is a new high capacity spine. I think the best thing we can see is adding cars to the Hartford line and to Shoreline East, having the capacity, the demand to demand more cars and service on those stations. So I think from the Transportation Committee's perspective, our recommendation would be to really look at how each of the bus services are doing their comprehensive operational analyses, their COAs, How frequently are they doing them? I know Middletown has recently proposed reorienting a bus line or two to make sure it stops at the train station that's nearest to Middletown. And I think that's how we're going to get this 1+1 is 3 synergies that bring our state into a growth mentality rather than, a sustaining mentality. One more on buses, particularly for fare-free question. And we've had free bus service for a long time. In New Haven, we have the Green Free Shuttle. It connects you from Union Station to the Green. It's called the Free Shuttle because it's always been free. Hartford, I think, has something similar, in Stamford as well. I think they call them the Dash up here. So it's a matter of when and where to apply fare-free transit. And I think one of the questions is speed. Does it increase the speed? Does it improve the service? Another question we should ask is how much does it cost to collect fares? The Scheid-Bachmann system we have on all the CT transit system, that's got an annual service fee attached to it, right? Some of the other questions we've heard from service providers as well is, they are presently operating sometimes some evenings as warming shelters. And that's not what the transit system's supposed to do as well. It's not completely clear cut what's to be done. And I don't envy your position at the Transportation Committee, but I do think that having service that is frequent, reliable, and fast is the most important thing. From there, we can have a conversation about no fare box timing. It does speed up the bus, and that's sometimes the most important thing. But I think from the advocate's perspective, there's been a lot of trying to use a scalpel and fix systems. Now they're just free. It's too easy it's too hard to do all these other things, right? If you've ever talked to a jobs in New Haven, we have the jobs center over on El Grasso Boulevard. Forgive me, it's this. And in the last 6 years, they do no longer have bus passes to give out to their clients. And so no one's showing up to interviews. So these, when you start pulling at the strings of where the fares are doing to people, it does get a little interesting. Like having no fare, the Workforce Alliance on El Grasso Boulevard no longer has to give out a bus pass. That's a big difference on the social service side too. You're saving a lot of money on the back end over there, and people are getting to appointments. It's very tough, but I'll say that there's other ways you can do it. And I'll end by saying this, you could 40% of the system in New Haven is on 4 bus lines. You could target there and be fare free and have that more sustaining longer. You could also do the last half mile or the last mile, literally. Anybody that's getting on the bus within a mile of downtown transfer is free. We also have free transfers. So, again, there's been a lot of ways to have a fare free system. We're happy to comment and support any ways that you have any questions. We'll do our research, but the DOT is the experts and they can definitely help you a lot more than we can.
Thank you. Thank you all for that thoughtful response. And again, as someone representing West Hartford and Newington and new to the Transportation Committee, there's a lot more to talk about. So I look forward to working with you all this session. And thank you to the chairs.
Thank you, Representative. I see Kate Rosen has her hand raised. Hi, Kate.
Hi, thank you so much. I did have one more point on the Hartford line. As soon to be, hopefully, once he's confirmed, Commissioner Eucalito likes to tell us that there are many of you legislators who like to take the train up to Hartford. And one of the big things is that if you are trying to do that intercity travel in the state of Connecticut, I looked it up while we were talking. The last train that you can take from New Haven on a Saturday night to get back to Hartford is 7:30 p.m. And so I feel like we're creating this artificial curfew of our residents and discouraging them from interacting in different cities and in different places. And so I think that having service that meets the user where they are, we saw Metro North weekend service came back much more robustly than commuter service. And so that would be something that I think if you were looking, Representative Farr, if you were looking specifically at supporting the Hartford line, it would be making it more accessible for people so that, they can have pizza later than 6:30 in New Haven and still get home. Thank you.
Appreciate that, Kate. And I think Representative Berger-Javallo has a question.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. We're going to take a trip now down the line. We've started in that sort of southeast corner. I'm going to move all the way down to the southwest corner, where I am, where I actually opt to drive 25 minutes into New York State to take a train because it's just easier than going to the Branchville line, which is in my own community. And in fact, I know that I have done the test where it took me 2 hours and 40 minutes to get to Grand Central by taking the line that's 5 minutes from my house, versus an hour and 40 minutes, including the Uber back to my car at Branchville. So, of course, I am going to advocate loudly for any sort of rail service that could improve our connection to the rest of the state. But I'm actually looking for a very practical, contextual answer. You talked about how the Waterbury and Danbury lines are the oldest in the fleet themselves are the oldest. Can you give me some context for how old the newest fleets are versus how old the oldest are?
Well, let's see, the M8s that just came, I mean, so there's still M8s, the M8s that came on the Shoreline East are about a year old, or less than a year. No, the M8's been around, but yeah, they started 10 years, but the ones that came in the Shoreline East were just off the line, the production line in Kawasaki. Yeah, those are brand new. The Waterbury line cars, I'm gonna estimate that they've been there since the 80s. Yes, there you go. Bombardier, right? Yeah, we're probably talking the 80s.
All right.
No,
Well,
hi, I'm Jim.
okay. Well, I just realized how old I am and doing the math on that.
I graduated in 85. I think that was
I don't want to
here.
think about this anymore. Okay. Thank you.
No.
I appreciate the detail.
My pleasure. And I will tell you that I think those two lines, you know, Waterbury's had, I just want to dovetail off the Danbury for a second. I think Waterbury's had a lot of success. You know, they put the passing sidings in, they've added the 7 additional trains. So they've done some really nice things there. The Derby Shelton just got the raised grant, and the Waterbury branch just got the $30 million federal grant for the raised platform, which should free up the $30 million that you guys budgeted to do the work the first time. So that should free up money there. But I do feel that, and again, I'm probably getting ahead of myself, that this is part of our Connecticut Rail Plan recommendations. I really think that both Waterbury and Danbury, you know, as we talk about environment and we talk about getting cars off the road, I can't underscore how important it is to really strongly push electrification in both from a freight and a car perspective, because those two lines still use diesel. And, you know, that's really not too, you know, that's not super cool for the environment. So I would definitely say that with those two branches, we should strongly consider electrification. And when we get cars, the only reason I mention that is if we are fortunate enough to get cars, I think they have to kind of be dual powered, one to ride for now, but also equally as important to be able to work on electric down the road.
Appreciate that. I know you have some time constraints. We want to get you to your meeting on time. But I also, and I know you have the Connecticut Rail Plan, but I do want to just say on the busing, I mean, obviously we have a whole contingent of folks in the state of Connecticut that use bus systems, because we're talking about how there isn't rail connectivity in some areas of the state. They need to rely on other forms of mass transit. And right now, it doesn't seem to me that there's real representation for our busing commuters. Has there been talk about combining the Rail Council with having some representation of that community?
So what I like to think today here that you saw a group that is engaged, has done research, has experience along all the different spectrums. So I say that as a backdrop of I think we should. I think we've gotten there. I think this body, in my opinion, I think that would be, my opinion, great to fall under our purview, because we get it. Many of us use busing, many of us use that as a last mile. I think there may be some proposals here for some kind of transit user council, and I don't think you need to reinvent the wheel. I think you have a group of people here who use it. You don't have to go out and find 17 new people to serve in an environment that's hard already. You already have people here. You already have people who get it. You already have people who use the service. So to answer your question, I think that would be a great addition.
Thank you, Jim. And thank you, Madam Chair. I'm a member of the Greater New Haven Transit District, which is our transit district in 17 towns that provides paratransit for your community, my community. And every quarter we get together and work on the operational issues at the transit district. The Greater Bridgeport Transit District similarly exists and gets together every month to talk about their fixed route systems. So I think there are a lot of interesting quirks to our transit districts, but there is a section of our statutes that governs what these transit districts do. And some of them are empowered to make recommendations and strengthen or change bus performances. Some of them, particularly, I'm thinking of Bridgeport, and Doug Holcomb is the executive director. I would strongly recommend reaching out to him. He knows a lot of extensively information about how his board has been performing over the years. I would also, just say that for our purposes, the commuter is, we should not necessarily divide the commuter into thirds. I would not like to divide my active transportation third over here and my bus transportation third over here and my rail transportation person goes to over here. That'd be 3 meetings a month I'd be going to, probably, knowing me. So I would just say that from, there, you do have some transit district language that you could look at how that's performing and as a recommendation. But then from our perspective, if it is tough to break the commuter up, because sometimes commuters are walkers, bikers, and car commuters, and all the above.
I just wanted to follow up and say that this is not rocket science. It's being done around the country, and there's no reason why we can't do it. We've got this good technology. It's out there. It's been proven. My sons, adult sons, are in the city, and they whip out this, and they decide whether they're going to take the bus on the left side of the street or the right side of the street. They can track whether it'll be there in a minute or 2 minutes, and they also can get from there to the subway and to the train system, and it works beautifully. And there's no reason why we should not be doing this. Which leads me to and maybe we'll talk about this later, but I mean, you can sort of see the big elephant. The way we've set up the system, and it's part of the history of what happened with the collapse of rail and then the reestablishment of it. We've set up a series of systems that are run by contractors. And the problem is that if you make a change in one, then you have to go back to the DOT again and work with another contractor to make a change. And so you have something of a nightmare in terms of just managing it, which goes back to the point that Jim made earlier, that with having an app on this phone or your phone, which brings us all together, begins to help, because if you can't measure what it is you're doing, it is virtually impossible to manage it. And that applies to no matter whether you're the government or you're a private sector employer. If you can't measure it, it's almost impossible to manage it.
All right, Senator Wong.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Rail transit is essential for the major corridors. You're all members. It's deeply important to you, but I'm just going to ask, COVID has changed the entire dynamic, right? Just as we demonstrated with your rail members Zooming, it's changed. Will it ever have the same volume? And will the work dynamic change impact how we're going to utilize rail? And that leads to my final question is, will it ever come back to be worthwhile, the infrastructure investment that is necessary? I hope you don't mind that I'm asking that, because the general public along non-corridor will ask that question. Will it come back? Workplace dynamics has changed. Rail is essential for the corridors, but there are large swaths of the state that don't utilize rail.
So here's my thought on that. I'm going to go back to what I talked about with the paradigm shift. I do think we have to look at rail transportation just a little bit differently. And I do think that we have to look at it more intrastate. I don't think it's any surprise that Hartford and Waterbury lost the least amount of riders. And quite frankly, both those lines are getting back to almost 100% of COVID numbers. Metro North is still moving, is still going to move 25 million people this year. I mean, they're not small numbers, they're large. So do I think that Metro North will be at 100% what they used to be? Probably not in the next 3 to 5 years. Do I think they'll be at 80%? Yeah, that's a lot. Do I think that Waterbury and Hartford line are going to get past 100% than what they used to be? Yes, I do. Do I think that if we manage the Shoreline East right and we expand it, do I think they'll get past where they were? Yeah, I do. So I am hopeful, and I think the data suggests that interstate rail will come back. Hartford line, Waterbury line are crushing it. I think the Shoreline East can, with the right attention and scope. And if, listen, I promise I wouldn't talk about subsidies, but when we were putting Medicare in, or we putting PF, paid family medical leave act, nobody questions subsidies. They question it when they don't want to do something, right? And so I think that if we put a little care and attention in that line, and we do work on zoning, and I do think we work on tourism, I think that line will also exceed 100% what it used to be. So yeah, I think the lines come back. I do.
And if you don't mind if I just add on that one point too, the reason that your first question was about why do we need the data? This is one of the reasons we want to see some of this very basic performance data, because the weekend train, as Kate mentioned, one of our council members on the video mentioned that the weekend rider service came back to 100%, early on in the pandemic, they were back to 100%, signaling to us that there is significant demand for rail, but that we continue to try to force the system back to the pre-COVID system. We're trying to get trains to go express at peak hours in the morning, for example, when maybe I've been taking the train a little bit later. I commute to Greenwich every day, and the afternoon train is sometimes really crowded when that would have been a dead train. So that's one of the reasons we really want to see that data, because there is, it seems to us anecdotally, a lot of demand for rail. It may just not necessarily be trying to force people back into the same exact schedule design. Thanks.
Thank you, Senator. And from our perspective, as hybrid work evolves, if you are working half-time in the office, that means we can support twice as many jobs or twice as many employees as we could before the pandemic. So if it is true that we're going to be in a hybrid work environment forever, that means we have more capacity to support more residents to have more jobs using the rail system. And I think that can be something that's really beneficial. To your point about not having rail everywhere, it's not going to be a universally supported topic. One of the rail corridors, however, is the most profitable rail corridor in the country. And that really does help when it is returning much more of a profit than any other system is.
Well, the other point to make is, I guess, a historical one. I mean, Shoreline East, which was originally created back in 1852, was the main way of getting from along the East Coast of the United States. And in fact, those rails all throughout the state of Connecticut were did hook up major centers throughout the state. And we have a lot of the rails that are now that are exclusively freight up through the northern part of the Connecticut that could be carrying passengers as well when it becomes appropriate to do so. And we have, for example, in the eastern part of Connecticut, we have the whole infrastructure that exists up there. And there used to be an active line that came down from Worcester down to Groton, and one came down from Springfield to Groton. And there is, this is a no dig situation, basically. The right of ways are there. The rails just have to be used appropriately. And it's worth looking at the historical perspective, because I am very convinced that it's going to come back. You just can't put more cars on our interstates. I mean, the interesting thing that's going on right now is the DOT is looking at expanding I-95 from Brantford to the Rhode Island border. And frankly, when I drive down I-95, although it's congested on that section, where do I hit the roadblock? It is at New Haven going all the way to the New York border. And so we're going to improve that section of the road. And what's that going to do on that section below? I mean, it's just, the old saying that if you build it, they will come. Now, unfortunately, they come and they end up in a parking lot, bumper to bumper. And that's a real problem because that is not productive for the economy or for individuals' health and welfare.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
you know, love the comment about Shoreline East. Emily, my daughter there. I remember the time we used to take the train and go visit Beema and go to dinner on the weekend, right? So the Shoreline East could be just I have children who live in Branford. I have a mother who lives in Groton. I have a sister who lives in Waterford. And I would use that Shoreline East on the weekend and we would love it. We would sit in the old table cars and play cards and we'd go out to dinner and you can't do it anymore. You just can't do it. It's not only about scheduling, it's also about, well, on the weekend it is scheduling, the block is scheduling, but it's also about the wins. We got to start focusing on the fact that these lines aren't just meant to get people to New York.
If I may, I don't want to neglect the people that are on the council in the Zoom. If they have any comments they want to add, and before they do, I want to reiterate, I am strongly in support of the rails and advocating for it. I just wanted to be able to have, as you all so effectively articulated, why it matters. And another factor why it's important to support the rail infrastructure is, as the good chairwoman had cited, we want to get cars off the road. And secondly, I think it has significant pollution environmental impact to get our cars off the road. So I appreciate the articulation for people that says it doesn't matter to me. It does matter. And I really appreciate your articulation. And if anybody on the Zoom
I suppose one
wants
thing,
to
there's
offer
actually,
that,
if I
thank
could,
you.
there's actually
Thank you, Mr.
days
Chair.
that I won't
Madam
go.
Chair.
There's weekends when you come back on route on 95, that traffic sits back for hours and hours. I actually think people don't use our tourism enough because they don't want to, they just don't want to deal with the ride.
I don't see any hands raised online. So and Jim, did you say you wanted to go over the?
Well, we hit most of the topics. I'm just going to
Okay.
just say one thing real quick and close, because we talked about our operational issues when Senator Wong asked about our investigative role and some of the really big problems we have just getting mutual respect and getting questions answered. So I'm just going to do this probably 30 seconds. We did submit our rail plan comments to the Department of Transportation. And we did submit those to you. And I'm just going to say, for us, it comes down to the 3 E's, right? For the future, environment, electrification. So I talked about electrification. I'm not going to kill the point, but again, I really think that that is a critical component in the environment, getting cars off the road. Expansion is another area. The House Bill 5423, which passed, you guys had given a legislative deadline of January. They're not going to make January. I think we'll be lucky to have it done in 2023. So just as those folks come to you and as you meet with Department of Transportation, I think it's important that you just put, in my opinion, put a little pressure on them, because House Bill 5423 is not anywhere near going to be complete during the time that you asked it to be complete. The second part of expansion is, again, Zell talked about it, is really hopefully being able to support that and support the expansion. Electric Boat, Pfizer, Westerly, Rhode Island, that's critical for that region. And then the last my 3 E's is, which we already talked about, ease of travel. It's too hard. We need a single system. We need to treat our commuting as a single system. Apps, scheduling, ticketing. So those were some of our rail plan comments. I think we hit every other topic. So you guys have been very generous with your time and we appreciate that.
Thank you so much. I don't see any. Oh, Representative Lamar, my co-chair.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Gilday and members of the council for coming here today. You know, I've probably invested almost all of my political capital at one point in time in one of the rail lines, right? Like 7 years ago, I put every ounce of political capital I had into the Hartford line, and you guys were there helping advocate at that moment in time how to best advocate to get that rail up and successful. And I really appreciated it then. Over the last few years, we really made a focus with the Waterbury line, getting the necessary investment in trains there and upgrading the rail line and the passing trains. I think there's an argument whether we're supposed to call it like track siding or whatever it is, but allowing trains to pass on the tracks and the upgrade of those stations and the facilities in and around the Waterbury line. And you guys have been steadfast advocates for all of those things. And so I greatly appreciate having you as folks I could rely on, because those weren't easy fights and you were always there pushing for them. So I do appreciate that. I'm so fascinated about a lot of comments here that you made that I wasn't expecting. I think as we've considered in the past, some of our micromobility concerns in and around our stations, I was viewing that more of in a top-down sort of way. Like I was getting advice from folks outside of Connecticut and looking at pilot programs in other states about how they address last mile. I know now that I have an incredible resource in you, and I don't know why I didn't think of that in the past about just going directly to you guys on some of those issues. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to grow and think about the future of the Rail Council and how that might interplay with just general public transit riders on our buses who are using Veo, who are using whatever they're using to get in and around our cities. I do appreciate the role that you play, and I look forward to hearing more from you guys in the future. And just a quick reminder, Senator Cohen, myself, and jointly Representative Kennedy and Senator Huang have appointments to the Rail Council. I know mine is currently vacant, and we'll have a nominee in the very near future. So thank you all.
Thank you again.
Yeah, and again, with that, I think we'll adjourn, but I do just want to again express my gratitude for having you all here today and for what you do. You know, Connecticut's a better place. The commuter system's a better place because there is the Commuter Rail Council advocating for good change and effective, safe, effective, efficient, and fast, as you say, transit options across the state. And hope we can just grow from here and get better. And with your input, I'm sure that's bound to happen. I think we'll make progress this session and hope to continue in that vein. So thank you so much for being here, and have a good meeting tonight.
Thank you again for your time. We're very grateful. Have a great
Thank you.